Hi, good afternoon. This is Meredith Lego, and I'm doing a series of teachings on the concept of Ascension science. And I've stated in other videos that much of my teachings have come from a being who I've been able to connect with sort of beyond the veil, named Ascended Master Hilarion. And that connection has been made through quantum entanglement, if you will. And after I meditate or during meditation, I'm basically able to download information from him. Sometimes I hear it through clairaudience. So in other words, I'm literally hearing answers come in. Or sometimes I do a form of automatic writing. But basically, I will ask a series of questions and get a series of answers. And the topics have ranged from more scientific, I guess, content that start to explain how it is that we are going through an ascension process, which essentially is nothing more than raising the vibrational frequency of your consciousness. So the last few videos in the teaching series, if you will, have started to dive into the concept of dimensions and densities, because this is becoming more of a setup for future content that will get into stages of ascension. And if you're new to the channel, I highly encourage you to actually go back to the very first video that basically has a 1.0 in front of it, or I think it's a 1 point. I forgot to put the O or the 1 after it, but essentially starts to frame up earlier concepts about the quantum field and the source field, and how it is that we're able to manifest within that reality, like how our consciousness interacts with the quantum field in order to help shape the reality that we experience and that our consciousness learns and grows through. Then it gets into mirroring and polarity. So again, when I've been receiving this content from Ascended Master Hilarion, who basically is basically a consciousness or a being that has moved past the need to reincarnate over and over, and he's basically helping me understand more about how to do that. So the lessons have come in as a buildup of different content, and in this particular video, I'm going to try and explain as best possible, according to what I've learned about the intersection between dimensions and densities. I did receive some of this content from Hilarion, but right now I can't seem to find the actual channeling that I did on it. So I'm going to try and connect together, based upon what I remember of the teaching, how those two things start to intersect. So if we go back to the last a couple of videos ago, I think it's titled Dimensions versus Densities. What Hilarion explained is that dimensions are basically gradations of vibrational frequency of consciousness, and densities are gradations of vibrational frequency of matter. And the way that we can understand it within our own human construct is we've created different measurement formats in order to be able to measure vibrational frequencies as they relate to time. And even though we know time technically doesn't exist, right now we're in a dimension where our consciousness has placed ourselves in a dimension where we're able to slow down time in order to better process or assimilate experiences that we have, so that we essentially can learn and grow through it. Because as we start to evolve and we move into higher densities and dimensions, we have the ability to manifest more in the moment. And we're not quite at a place where humanity is quite ready for that. So we are in a situation or kind of a construct where time is slowed down a little bit. And that helps us better process or understand the experiences that we are manifesting and how to learn through that. So if you go through dimensions, again, as being sort of gradations of vibrational frequency of consciousness, there's this whole concept of if you kind of think about a being conscious, you start to get into the idea of a sentient being starting to really know itself or identify itself as sort of a being that is thinking. So if you go to, let's say, a rock is actually sentient, although we may not think about it that way, but it may not yet understand itself as being a sentient being. And a lot of this is what I'm going to start to explain actually connects into what we understand to be the chakra systems and how we evolve through chakra systems as well. Animals would be another, or let's say plants, would be another form of consciousness. Again, still sentient. And I think the plant kingdom, if you will, obviously is very connected through neural networks and is able to communicate quite broadly within the plant kingdom, but may not yet understand about knowing thyself. So I'm led to believe that's starting to change based upon some research that was done in the 1950s or 60s. Animals, likewise, are sentient beings, and I think are beginning to understand and know that know themselves a little bit more of sentient beings. So they're starting to raise up the evolutionary consciousness ladder, and obviously we're going through that process as well. So to start to explain the connection a little bit more, I thought it would be helpful to talk about vibrational frequency, similar to what I did last time, and I'm going to use ways that we've started to understand it within our humanity through measurement systems. But again, vibrational frequencies are, the way it was explained to me, really the rate at which energy, kind of as seen through, or as we understand it through atoms or quantum particles, are vibrating. So it's the rate at which they're oscillating and generating different waveforms. And that's how Hilarion had originally explained it to me. Now, when I was kind of preparing for this video, oddly enough, I wanted to look it up because I had actually never looked up the official definition. And there's different definitions out there, but I found this one that was kind of interesting, that vibrational frequencies have been used for many years by chemists to identify bonding arrangements between molecules. And that kind of makes sense when you apply it to the definition of density. But again, as I set up in the last couple videos, I used like visual formats of sine waves, which basically are showing how sound essentially can be a vibrational frequency. And you see this kind of play out in the music world. Essentially that can show us different sort of frequencies and how long it takes for the frequency to essentially move through a complete frequency. So I printed off this page, or a couple series of pages, to try and explain it. And by the way, I am not a musician, I am not a physicist, I am not a chemist. So I'm doing the best I can to try and explain this based upon what we know, in science, and relating it back to what I've learned from a higher level principle with Hilarion. So this basically shows us the concept of how vibrational frequencies play out within, let's say, music. And I am not a musician. I wasn't trained in music. But what I do know is that you've got the whole concept of the octave. And there's many sort of frequencies and pitches within a particular octave. And so you can see in this representation of it that essentially the octave starts to get subdivided into 7 subparts. And these are, basically different pitches within it. So again, because I don't understand it quite well, I wanted to look it up and look up the definition. So an octave in music is an interval whose higher note has a sound wave frequency of vibration twice that of its lower note. So thus, an international standard, pitch A, above middle C vibrates at 440 hertz cycles per second. The octave above A vibrates at 880 hertz, while the octave below vibrates at 220 hertz. So, essentially this shows that within a particular octave, there's sort of subcomponents of it. And as I understand it, it can divide into 8 subcomponents. Okay, so that's important because as I tried to explain in the first few videos of some of the information I got from Hilarion, is that we essentially are energy, and our thoughts and our emotions are sort of emitting different vibrational frequencies that do generate a sound. Now that's important because sound has the ability to create patterns within quantum material, and those patterns can come together and form different densities of matter the way that we understand it today. So, if you haven't done any research, I encourage you, and I will try to remember to include a link in this description to show examples of cymatics, which is really the study of showing how sound frequencies actually form. So you can kind of see it materially play out. But I tried to print off a page so that you can kind of understand it a little bit better. So this is a page that shows a representation of being able to see how sound starts to, or different frequencies, that we can hear in terms of sound, starts to create different pattern formations of physical matter. And what you're seeing here in these images is sand or salt, so something very, very lightweight that has been put on top of a Chladni plate. I'm not sure if I'm always saying that right, but basically it's a metal plate that can vibrate when it's hooked into a sound generator or a frequency generator. And I actually did this with my kids as science experiments when they were younger to help them understand this concept, and it's pretty fun to watch. So essentially, as you start pumping in higher and higher frequencies into the metal plate, you see that the sand on top of the plate is starting to form more complex geometric structures, okay? So if you kind of go back to that definition about the bonds between molecules, I'm not sure how that plays out. I don't understand that. It would be interesting to ask Hilarion that. But you see different sort of geometric patterns start to play out. And we're seeing this on a plate in a two-dimensional format. But I have to imagine, and I believe that different scientists have tried to study this in a three-dimensional format in water so that they could see how the geometries play out there. So essentially, again, you're seeing how sound frequency can start to have an influence or an impact on the creation of matter, or patterns that essentially create matter. So what I do understand is that as you start to move up dimensions, you're essentially moving up whole octaves of vibrational frequency. And you're doing this through consciousness evolution, but as you're doing this as a being, you have the ability to essentially influence or impact the formation of the matter that you're associating your consciousness with, and your body, and the world that you kind of reside in. So that starts to have an influence on different, let's say, patterns that you're seeing within sort of the world at large. So not only are the individual beings or consciousness units that are associated with matter, they're sort of at a different dimension in terms of their consciousness, that's having an impact or influence on the formation of their density in terms of how the consciousness is interacting with, let's say, the world that it's interfacing with. And the way that I tried to, explain this is that this kind of looks like sine waves, if you will, but you essentially have, let's say, starting with lower densities, which would be the first density, the second density, and the third density. That's actually where we play out right now. We're starting as humans to shift into the fourth density, but essentially we are at a kind of a density structure that is more dense matter in terms of what we experience, what our consciousness experience. And we have historically been in the third dimension, which is associated with, again, more dense material, or how matter essentially forms. So our consciousness obviously is vibrating at a certain vibrational frequency, and that is creating for this the illusion of sort of dense material. As you start to move up into different consciousness understanding, you're going to be creating different vibrational frequencies through your electromagnetic field and your consciousness. That's essentially going to create a different formation of density patterns that you interface with, your consciousness interfaces with in your reality. And that's as you're going to start to move to like fourth, fifth, and sixth density. And again, as I tried to explain in the video of dimensions and densities, is that these are basically objects that are just, or consciousness units that are sort of residing in objects that are essentially moving at just higher speeds. And as a result, right now, us in sort of the densities and dimensions that we're playing at, we can't necessarily see them because they're just vibrating much faster, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily, from a density perspective, they still exist. We just can't see them. So in some ways, this is how it goes. Now, as I mentioned before, there is a connection to the chakra systems in terms of our evolution. So the first density, in many ways, starts to connect with, let's say, what we would know in our chakra system as being the root chakra. The second density would be the sacral chakra, and then the third density would be the solar plexus chakra. And Hilarion necessarily hasn't taught me about these concepts, but having done a lot of research on this, and again, I encourage you to do your own research, is that the root chakra is basically tied to consciousness being able to be safe and secure in its environment. So it's very much about fight or flight, being safe and secure. The second chakra, if you will, starts to get into the concept of learning to not so much interact. It does get into starting to interact with other consciousness units or other beings in the surrounding, but also control of sort of the sexual urges, if you will. And third level density, again, is associated with the solar plexus chakra, which is about being able to sort of stand in your power or kind of take more control of your environment within the environment that you're interacting with. I'm probably not explaining it as well as I could, but what I'm trying to do is basically explain how the concept of dimensions and densities start to interact. And so as beings start to essentially master control of, let's say, fears associated with or get past the need to constantly think about fight or flight and survival, or needing to reproduce all the time, or, how they're interacting with others in their environment. Once they kind of get past that, it's going to have a shift on their consciousness as a being, and therefore start to have a shift on the vibrational frequency that they're giving off that is going to shift the density level that they're manifesting within their own bodies and their own environments. So that's how it plays out. Now, as I understand it, we are shifting into sort of the next major series of octaves. And essentially, as you're doing this, there are different octaves that you're going up. And so the octaves tie back to what I last tried to talk about with music. So again, you're kind of moving up octaves, right? And essentially, as we're kind of going up to the next octave, so your consciousness, and then therefore the body that you're living in or manifesting in within is starting to vibrate at a higher dimensional frequency. You're going to experience a different level of density in your environment. So we're starting to shift here to the fourth density, which will put us at basically the fifth dimension. So I probably didn't do it as much justice as I can. This would be a topic I need to explore a lot more with Master Hilarion. We didn't necessarily get into this topics because I didn't necessarily ask the questions when I was learning through it. He didn't necessarily explain, all of this in detail, but I've tried to piece together some of it from many, many different sources that I've been guided to explore and do research on over time. However, I wanted to show this because, again, as we get into stages of ascension, we're going to learn about the significance of sort of what's happening as we're ascending up and how it has material impact on the four different bodies. So at least where we are now, you're starting to master different body components: the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body. And these very much do tie together with these different dimensions and these different densities, if you will. So I know this was a little bit more complex. I'm still trying to understand it, trust me. I'm still learning through this process, but hopefully I've been able to at least share some level or pass off some level of information that I've learned on the connection between dimensions and densities, and how that plays out with how our consciousness is emanating off different frequencies that create sound, that then essentially create patterns in the quantum field, that then create the matter, or create the matter that we essentially see ourselves existing in day to day. So hopefully that helps a little bit with your understanding. I know I have a lot more research to do on it as well. If the material resonates with you, I encourage you to become a member of the channel and then sign up for alerts for additional content that I post. And also, I encourage you to do your own research. Don't take what I am passing on, like as verbatim. Do your own research and find what resonates with you. Obviously, we're going through an ascension process, and you have to find your own truth. These are pieces of information that I'm getting from different sources. A lot of it first emanates from working with Ascended Master Hilarion, but I also, while he's passing on information, I also have to determine what resonates with me. Some things that I've learned through him don't always resonate for me, or I'm just not ready yet, and I need to really process it and begin to understand it a little bit better. So I go through those phases as well, and I have over the last several years. So with that, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks very much.